Hi everyone, welcome to this lesson in health information. We're going to talk today about how to analyze health information, check and see if it's valid, if there's any bias, and if it's relevant for us. There's a lot of health information out there these days, especially on the internet. The internet is almost a limitless source of information. And it's a place that we often go to seek information, and sometimes we go and seek information about our health there. Many people seek information through lots of resources, including internet organizations such as the Canadian Cancer Society website, or lots of different types of organizations that have websites. We also seek information through other people, as well as possibly in print. We might read an article in the newspaper about our health, or we might be looking at a pamphlet or a magazine, something like that. So how do we know? These are the questions we need to ask ourselves. How do we know if what we're reading is accurate? Accurate means that what we're reading is close to the truth. Sometimes we come across information that is not accurate, and if we are to take it as truth, it could be misleading. How do we know if somebody is trying to sell us something? Right? Are they giving us information that is pushing us to feel like we need to buy a particular product? This is something that we want to be aware of if we're reading information about our health. How do we check? If we're reading something by an author, how do we know that he or she is educated on what he or she is writing about? All of these questions involve something called health information literacy. And that is what we are going to focus on in this section. How do we, as just regular people, become health information literate, and just information literate in general? All right, well, what does it mean to be information literate? Being information literate allows us to assess or double check the validity of any information that we look at. So when I read something, I want to know that it's true. I want to know that what I'm reading is not incorrect information. Being information literate also means that we know how to check references. We know how to look at an author's name and check if they have any professional affiliations, okay, such as being a doctor or being a researcher for a particular scientific group. Being information literate also allows us to check if the information that we're reading is consistent with other sources on the same topic. So what am I reading? I want to be able to check and make sure that I could find that information somewhere else as well, and it is consistent, okay, with other experts. Recognizing if the company who is providing the information is trying to sell a product to me. That's something I want to be able to recognize, and being information literate allows me to do that. Looking for bias or points of view. We'll talk a little bit more about what that is and whether or not this changes how valid the information is. And finally, being health information literate allows me to make sure the information is current. I don't want to be reading about something that's 30 years old and the information is no longer relevant. So let's start with checking references. How do we do that? When it comes to health information, okay, it's always advisable to check for references and credentials. Be aware of health information that does not provide any credentials for the author. If you're reading an article online and at the very bottom the author's name has nothing attached to it, there are no credentials such as, for example, we might see something like MD after somebody's name, which stands for medical doctor. All other types of credentials might include affiliations with who they work for. So for example, we might see the name of an organization after their name, such as the Canadian Cancer Society. Those sorts of organizations, seeing that after an author's name tells me that they are a member of a professional association, and that gives me a little bit more faith and trust in the information that I'm reading. If you don't see that and all you see at the end of an article is the name Joe Smith, you want to be a bit wary of that health information. Okay, how do I know that that person has any expert knowledge on the subject that they're writing about? Often we read online articles that are written by people who are not experts. Some of these articles might include Ensign articles. Sometimes the people writing for Ensign articles, this is a popular source of articles on the internet. Oftentimes those people do have knowledge on the subject and they might even be experts, but we need to be a little bit wary because if you have a look at this website, anybody can be an Ensign expert. You're allowed to submit up to 10 articles for free, and those articles may or may not be reviewed immediately by the Ensign article company. So that means that if you're reading an Ensign article, we want to be careful that we're not assuming that an Ensign expert is also an expert on the topic that they're writing about. Forums such as Yahoo Answers, as well as many other forums out there, allow people to post questions such as how much exercise is healthy for me to get each day? That might be a question that I could put on a forum, and several different people can provide answers for that. Again, there is no regulation of the answers that are being put on those forums, so you want to be wary when you read somebody else's answer that could just be somebody's opinion. Finally, again, checking for credentials. Whether I'm reading an article online or an article in the newspaper, looking for some type of credential or affiliation at the end of the name is really important. You can also then cross-check if you see an affiliation like an organization and you've never heard of that organization, you could search that organization on the internet and find out a little bit more about them. Another way that we can identify authors that have some expert knowledge is if we see references in the article that we're reading. References might be, for example, a link to a scientific study. That shows that the person is basing their argument on some facts, okay? And that's an excellent way to give us more confidence in the article that we're reading. Just something to think about, because we do use the internet so often when we're searching for information. When you conduct a search for a topic, any topic at all, generally speaking, the #1 website that appears on the top of your hit list is Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. Wikipedia, by its definition, is a wiki. And a wiki is a website designed to enable the users, which is anybody who accesses it, to contribute, okay, to add to the information that's on the website, as well as to edit the website. So that means that even you today could go on to Wikipedia and edit the information that's on there. Of course, because Wikipedia has become such a popular website, there is a very consistent monitoring system in place where experts on each subject are employed by Wikipedia to monitor the changes that are reviewed and check for their validity. So if somebody posts something to Wikipedia that is not valid, it would be removed almost immediately. So Wikipedia is a really good source for us to use. It is monitored very closely. But just as something to think about, wikis in general are made and maintained by users. Checking for consistency. What does that mean? What does this word mean, consistency? If something's consistent, it means that if I checked multiple different sources, I should find the same information or very close information every time. Checking for consistency is an excellent way to confirm health information. This involves doing a little bit of research and comparing different sources that you find on the same topic. This means that if you find a great website, before you take everything at face value, you might want to search that same topic on the internet and try to find at least 1 or 2 other websites or articles that support that information and are consistent. Some health information promotes products. In other words, when you go to their website, you see that a product is being promoted. So something is, maybe sometimes it's on the sidebar or on the top, or sometimes it's right in the article itself. We want to be critical of health information that is trying to promote a product. We want to be careful here. When I say critical, I mean a source that is promoting a product is not necessarily an invalid source. Sometimes the information can be very accurate indeed, but we do want to be aware, okay, and informed. That's part of being health information literate. So if we're reading something where a product is being promoted, we want to stop and critically ask ourselves, is this article really giving me good information, or is it giving me information that is going to make me feel like I need to buy this product? Again, being health information literate means that if I have any doubts, I could compare the information with another website or another article and make sure it's consistent. That's a good check for accuracy. Being aware of bias and points of view can also be tricky. Sometimes it's very obvious if an article is biased. If we're reading an opinion article, for example, these are very often found on websites as well as in your local newspaper. Quite often there are opinion health articles, also in magazines. If you're reading an opinion article, you've got to bear in mind that the article is being written by somebody who is voicing their opinion. So again, it's good to check for consistency. Sometimes it's not obvious when we're reading an article or checking information. It's not as obvious if that information is biased. Biased means that it is in support of a particular viewpoint. That's when checking those references is really useful. If you are reading something that is factual, usually the author has a medical degree or is affiliated with an organization that is linked to health information. If you're reading a point of view article, often we'll see that there are no affiliations with the author at all. And that means that there's a higher chance that that article is an opinion article or it's biased. Again, remember that bias doesn't necessarily mean that the information is misleading, but there is a higher chance that it is. And so if we see that an article is written by somebody who does not have any credentials or affiliations, we should compare the information with another source. Finally, the last step in checking information to make sure that it is relevant for you and meaningful is to check how current it is. When you get your milk out from the very back of the fridge, if you have any questions on how good the milk is, you would check the expiry date. And we should be doing the exact same thing when we read information in print or on the internet. We should be checking how current it is. That means looking at the published date on health information. Generally, the published date on a website is at the very bottom. In online or in print, it is usually somewhere on the top. And checking to see how old the information is an excellent way to determine if it's still valid information. If I'm reading something from earlier this year, I can be pretty confident that that information is really relevant. If I'm reading something from 1980, I would definitely want to compare that information with another source. So why is all this important? Well, being health information literate allows you to make informed decisions about your health. There's a lot of information out there. Being critical of what we read is very important. And finally, remember that any serious questions that we have about our health should be addressed with a physician, with our family doctor, or by going to a walk-in clinic. With all the information available, more and more people like to use the internet to self-diagnose themselves, which can lead to some serious complications for your health. So if your questions are serious in nature, we always want to make sure we check them with a physician. Thank you so much for joining me today. That is it for our lesson, and please carry on to the next assignment in this section. Bye for now.